You've heard the stories, but this isn't one of those. What happens when a woman who never signed up for this new family finds herself sharing a room with the son of the man she married? What happens when the distance between them isn't just physical but emotional, fractured by resentment, fear, and the weight of expectations? This is no ordinary family conflict. This is about two lives colliding in the most uncomfortable way possible. The room gets smaller with each passing night, and every conversation feels like a battlefield. The question is, will they ever find common ground, or will the space between them remain impossibly wide? Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to stay updated. Your support means the world to us, and we truly appreciate it. Thank you. When you're forced to live under the same roof, but everything about the other person feels like a wall you can't break down, what happens? A stepmother and her stepson, two people who never asked for each other's presence, now trapped in the same room. There's no escaping the silence, no running from the tension that thickens the air with every passing day. They say time heals all wounds, but this time, the more they're forced together, the deeper the divide grows. What happens when resentment simmers beneath the surface, when emotions that have been buried for so long start to claw their way out? Secrets are whispered in the dark, but some truths are too painful to face. This isn't just about sharing a room, it's about everything that's unsaid, everything that could go horribly wrong. Can they find a way to coexist, or will the pressure of their unspoken conflict explode in a way neither of them saw coming? In a quiet suburban home, life for this blended family had slowly started to settle. After months of trying to adjust to new routines and unfamiliar faces, there was a fragile sense of peace. The father, Michael, a man doing his best to hold his new family together, had married Sarah, a woman trying to step into a role she never quite signed up for. Sarah, with her calm demeanor and hopes of building a family from the pieces of the past, is still finding her way. But it's not easy. There are moments when the weight of what she's been asked to do feels too heavy to carry, and she often finds herself questioning her place. She's trying to love, trying to blend, but something is missing. Then there's Ethan, Michael's 16-year-old son from his first marriage. He's never been thrilled about his father's new relationship and hasn't made any effort to hide his feelings. Quiet and distant, Ethan has kept his distance, using sarcasm and avoidance to keep everyone at arm's length. The father, caught in the middle, has tried to play the peacekeeper, but the tension between his wife and son is undeniable. He doesn't know how to fix what feels like an unfixable situation, as his attempts only seem to make things worse. Everything seemed manageable until one night, when a situation forces Sarah and Ethan into an uncomfortable position. Their already strained relationship takes an unexpected turn when they are forced to share a room together, a necessity due to a temporary living arrangement. The air between them is thick with unspoken words, a quiet conflict that neither knows how to resolve. Sarah lies awake at night, feeling the weight of Ethan's silence, knowing that he resents her presence in his life. Ethan, meanwhile, feels trapped in a house he no longer recognizes, every glance at Sarah a reminder of how much his life has changed, and how little he's willing to accept it. Every night, the walls between them seem to grow higher. The room, once a neutral space, becomes the battleground for a war neither knows how to fight. The sounds of shifting in bed, of deep sighs that fill the stillness, are all that fills the room in the dark hours. Both are navigating an invisible line, Sarah, trying to find a place in Ethan's world, and Ethan, struggling to accept someone he feels has intruded into his life. As the days go on, the tension only intensifies. Every conversation, every interaction feels strained, and every moment in that room is a reminder that something has to give. The pressure is building, and sooner or later one of them will crack. As the days pass, the quiet tension between Sarah and Ethan begins to unravel in small, almost imperceptible ways. It starts with the way they avoid looking at each other, a shared silence that speaks volumes. Sarah tries, time and again, to engage Ethan in casual conversation, asking about school or his interests, but every attempt is met with short, clipped answers that never seem to open the door to anything deeper. There are moments when she catches him staring out the window, a look in his eyes that she can't quite place, resentment, maybe, or just the heaviness of a burden too young to carry. She wonders if he sees her as an intruder in his life, someone who doesn't belong, someone who took the place of a mother he lost too soon. But no matter how hard she tries, she can never seem to find the words to bridge that gap. The awkwardness becomes unbearable at times. One evening, while Sarah is folding laundry, she feels Ethan's eyes on her. When she turns to look at him, he quickly averts his gaze, as though he's been caught in the act of something he's not supposed to be doing. The silence lingers. It's not that he doesn't want to speak, it's that he doesn't know how to. He's not just angry, he's confused. Every day he's forced to face the reality of this new family, of a father who has moved on from the life he once knew, and of a woman who is trying so desperately to take up space in a world that feels too small for her. Sarah, for all her attempts at kindness, can't ignore the little things that feel off. The subtle manipulations that Ethan throws her way, the way he accidentally locks her out of the bathroom when she needs it, the way he insists on using the living room at all hours of the night to watch shows she knows his father disapproves of. These actions aren't overt, but they are enough to make Sarah feel like an outsider in her own home, a feeling that tightens around her chest each day. In the dark, she begins to wonder if this is Ethan's way of testing her, pushing her to see how far she will bend before breaking. But Sarah isn't the only one hiding something. Ethan, too, is struggling with the secrets he keeps locked away. His resentment isn't just aimed at Sarah, it's aimed at everything that's changed. The divorce, his father's remarriage, the loss of a mother who isn't just a name in a photograph. What he doesn't say, what he can't bring himself to say, is that deep down, he's afraid of being replaced. He feels like a relic of a past his father no longer talks about, and every time he sees Sarah's face, he's reminded of a life he can never go back to. It's easier to take it out on her, to make her the villain in this story, than to admit that he's scared and lost in a world that's moving too fast. As the tension mounts, the moments of confrontation become more charged. One night, Sarah overhears Ethan talking to his father, his voice a mixture of frustration and vulnerability. He's not talking about Sarah directly, but the words cut deeper than any accusation could. "It's just not the same," he says. "It doesn't feel like home anymore." Sarah stands frozen, hearing the sadness in his voice, the weight of what he's carrying. But she doesn't know how to reach him. She doesn't know how to tell him that she's trying to make a home for them both, even if she's not sure what that looks like yet. In those quiet moments, Sarah feels the loneliness creep in. She's beginning to understand that this living situation is not just about a room they're forced to share, it's about the emotional space they both occupy in the family, and how neither one of them knows how to navigate it. They're both in this strange limbo, two people who desperately want to find peace but don't know how to let go of the past. The house, once filled with hopes of a new start, now feels like a pressure cooker, the walls closing in on them as the secrets they've been keeping from each other start to surface. Neither Sarah nor Ethan knows what to do with what they're discovering about themselves, and the cracks in their fragile truce are starting to widen. One thing is certain: the family they've been trying to build is built on a foundation of unspoken truths that are starting to unravel at the seams. Sarah had barely settled into bed when she felt the shift in the air, the weight of a storm brewing. Ethan was sitting on his side of the room, facing the wall, his posture rigid, his eyes locked on the dark void outside the window. Sarah had tried to ignore the growing tension, to let the silence between them act as a temporary truce, but tonight it felt different. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with unspoken words. She cleared her throat, trying to break the stillness. "Ethan," she said softly, "can we just talk for a minute?" Her voice, gentle but firm, was an attempt to reach across the invisible line that had divided them for so long. She had tried to be patient, to give him space, but this was becoming unbearable. He didn't respond, not at first. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he let out a sigh, one so heavy it felt like it carried the weight of the world. "About what?" His voice was cold, detached, as if he wasn't even talking to her but to the room itself. Sarah swallowed, unsure how to approach the subject. She'd always tried to avoid confrontation, but something in her, something deep inside, told her it was time to stop pretending everything was fine. She could no longer ignore the palpable distance between them, the wall he had built up between them that she couldn't tear down. I just want to understand, she said, her voice cracking slightly. You don't have to like me, Ethan, but I'm trying here. I'm trying to make this work. Ethan's shoulders tensed, the muscles in his back rigid with anger. He turned slightly, just enough for her to see the contempt in his eyes. You think I don't know what you're doing? He snapped. You're trying to make things work because you think you have to, but you don't get it, do you? You're not my mom. You'll never be my mom. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The words stung, a sharp reminder of how she would never fill the void left by his mother. She had known it all along, but hearing him say it so bluntly with such venom made her feel like she was suffocating under the weight of his rejection. I never wanted to replace her, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, the hurt seeping through her words. I just wanted a chance. To be part of your life, to be a family, even if it's not perfect. A family? Ethan scoffed, his tone bitter. What family? This isn't a family. It's a joke. And you're the punchline. The words hit Sarah like a slap. She recoiled, her heart racing, the unfairness of it all overwhelming her. But she couldn't give up. Not yet. She forced herself to keep her voice steady, even as a tear slipped down her cheek, betraying the flood of emotions she had kept hidden for so long. I'm trying, Ethan. I'm trying to build something with your dad. I didn't choose any of this, but I'm here and I care. I care about you too, even if you don't believe it. Ethan's gaze darkened and he shifted, now fully facing her. There was something cold and calculating in the way he looked at her, as if he had been waiting for this moment. You think this is easy for me? His words were sharp, his voice lowering to a dangerous tone. You think it's easy to watch my dad move on, to bring you into our lives like you're just another piece of furniture? I hate it here. I hate that you're here. You don't belong and you never will. The room felt impossibly small now, like the walls were closing in around them. Sarah's mind raced, her emotions crashing through her like waves in a storm. She could feel her own anger rising, but she fought to keep it in check. If she lost control now, she knew it would only make things worse. Still, something inside her snapped, and she spoke before she could stop herself. You think I want this? She asked, her voice rising. You think I wanted to come into your life and take everything away from you? Do you think it's easy for me to be here in this room every night feeling like I'm walking on eggshells? You don't get it, Ethan. I'm not the enemy here. The words hung in the air, heavy and charged, and for a moment neither of them moved. Sarah's heart was racing now, her pulse thumping in her ears. She had never wanted this fight, but it felt like they were both slowly being pulled into a trap they couldn't escape. Ethan stared at her, his face a mixture of frustration and something darker, something Sarah couldn't quite identify. But it was there, lurking in the depths of his eyes like a secret he had been keeping from everyone, including himself. I'm not the one who's been manipulating anyone, Ethan finally said, his voice low, almost menacing. You think you're the only one who's trying? Maybe you should look at how much my dad's changed since you've been here. He doesn't even see it. But I do. And I hate it. So don't pretend like you're the only one with feelings, Sarah. I've got plenty of my own, and none of them are good. Sarah recoiled, the realization hitting her like a cold wave. Ethan had been playing a game all along, using his father's absence to subtly manipulate him, to twist the emotional dynamics in the house. The way he acted out, the way he pushed her buttons, it wasn't just anger. It was a calculated move to make her feel like an outsider. And she had fallen for it. She had let him manipulate her into questioning her place in this family. But now the realization was sharp, and Sarah knew that if she didn't start standing her ground, this battle, this war between them would consume everything. I won't be your scapegoat anymore, Ethan, she said, her voice firm, a surge of strength rising in her chest. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not backing down. If you want to keep this fight going, fine. But don't think for a second that I won't fight back. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was deafening, heavy with the weight of their words, their anger, their pain. And as Sarah lay there, staring at the ceiling, she realized that this was only the beginning. The room was no longer just a space they shared. It was a battleground, and neither of them was willing to retreat. The aftermath of that night was a heavy silence that seemed to hang in the air like smoke from a fire that refused to die. Sarah lay awake long after Ethan had stormed out of the room, her mind racing with a mix of anger and guilt. The words they had exchanged echoed in her mind, each one laced with the sharp sting of regret. She had never imagined it would come to this, that she would end up in a confrontation so raw, so brutal, with the person she had been trying to connect with the most. The silence in the room now felt oppressive, suffocating even, and she couldn't help but feel the weight of her own failures pressing down on her. In the hours that followed, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had been irrevocably broken between them. She had wanted so desperately to reach Ethan, to show him that she wasn't the enemy, that she was just trying to build something real. But in the heat of that moment, she had said things she didn't mean, things she wished she could take back. Every accusation, every hurtful word she had thrown at him now felt like a mistake. Her heart ached with the realization that this wasn't the way she had envisioned their relationship unfolding. Instead of building a bridge, she had built a wall. The next morning, the house felt even quieter than usual. Michael, who had been blissfully unaware of the magnitude of what had happened, entered the kitchen with his usual optimism, but even he couldn't ignore the tension that now filled the air. He tried to make small talk, asking if anyone wanted breakfast, but his words hung in the air, unanswered. Sarah couldn't look at him, not yet. The guilt was too much. She had always prided herself on being strong, on doing the right thing, but now she felt like she was losing control of everything. She didn't know how to fix the damage that had been done. Ethan, for his part, avoided both of them as much as possible. He had retreated into his own space, his anger simmering beneath the surface, but it was clear to Sarah that there was something else at play, a vulnerability he wasn't ready to face. He hadn't spoken to her directly since their confrontation, and when their eyes did meet, it was only for a brief, tense moment before he turned away. It was as though he was shutting down, closing himself off completely, and that hurt more than anything. He was the one person Sarah was desperate to understand, to reach, but now it felt like she was losing him in ways she couldn't explain. Michael eventually pulled Sarah aside, his concern evident in the way he looked at her. "What happened last night?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with confusion. "I know something's off. Why won't he talk to me?" Questions stung, and Sarah could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had promised herself that she wouldn't make him choose between her and Ethan, but now she wasn't sure what choice he would make. Would he side with her, or would his loyalty to his son tear their fragile relationship apart? "I don't know," Sarah said, her voice strained. "I don't know how to fix it. We both said things we shouldn't have said. I tried, Michael. I really did. But I'm not sure what else to do. Every time I try, it feels like I push him further away." Michael stood there in silence, processing her words. There was a heaviness in the air between them, an unspoken truth neither of them wanted to confront. But even in the silence, Sarah could feel the distance between them growing. It wasn't just Ethan who was slipping away, it was her too. Her relationship with Michael was no longer as simple as it had been. The cracks were beginning to show, and she wasn't sure if they could be fixed. Later that day, Sarah found herself sitting alone in the shared room. The bed, once a place where she had hoped to find some peace, now felt like a battlefield. She ran her fingers along the fabric of the sheets, the very same sheets where everything had exploded just hours earlier. The room felt smaller now, not in the physical sense, but in the way it trapped her in her own guilt. How could she have let things get so out of hand? How could she have allowed her emotions to take control and hurt Ethan, the one person she had been trying hardest to connect with? Her mind drifted back to the confrontation, the look in Ethan's eyes when he told her she wasn't his mother. The raw, unfiltered pain in his voice had cut deeper than anything she had ever felt. She had wanted to push through, to show him that she could be a mother figure in his life, that she could make this work. But now, after everything that had happened, she wasn't sure if he would ever let her. The truth was, Sarah realized, she wasn't just fighting for a place in Ethan's life. She was fighting for her own self-worth. She was fighting to prove that she wasn't a failure, that she wasn't just the woman who had married Michael and tried to fill a role that she wasn't meant to fill. But in the process, she had become someone she didn't recognize, someone who was too quick to lash out, too quick to assume that Ethan's silence was something she had to fix. As the day wore on, Sarah found herself questioning everything. The family they were trying to build, the life they were trying to piece together, it all felt like it was slipping through her fingers. She didn't know if she could repair what had been broken, if she could make it right with Ethan or with Michael. The weight of her guilt, the confusion of the situation, was starting to take its toll. And in the quiet of that room, Sarah realized that she was no longer just trying to make a family. She was struggling to hold on to herself. Ethan, too, was trapped in his own spiral. He hadn't wanted to go this far, hadn't wanted to lash out at Sarah the way he had. But something about her presence in his life, the way she seemed to take up space where his mother used to be, drove him to the edge. Now, as he sat alone in his room, staring at the walls that felt like they were closing in on him, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was losing both his father and the life he once knew. He hated this, hated the way things were changing, hated the way he felt so helpless to stop it. But in his anger, in his fear, he had pushed Sarah away, and now he wasn't sure how to get back. The family, once bound by the hope of creating something new, was now unraveling. No one knew how to put the pieces back together, and the distance between each of them seemed to grow with every passing moment. The confusion, the regret, the guilt, it was all part of the fallout from a conflict that had been building for far too long. And in the end, Sarah, Ethan, and Michael were all left to wonder if anything could ever be the same again. The breaking point came suddenly, like a dam finally giving way under the pressure of years of hidden truths and unspoken resentments. It was late afternoon, and the house was eerily quiet when Ethan stormed into the living room, his face twisted with frustration and hurt. Sarah was sitting there, trying to make sense of everything, but the moment he walked in, the air shifted. His voice cracked, the rawness of his emotions breaking through his usual armor. "You think I don't see what's going on?" Ethan spat, his chest rising with each angry breath. "You think I can't tell that you're just pretending? Pretending to care, pretending to be this perfect little family?" His words hit Sarah like a punch, but she stayed still, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been waiting for this moment, dreading it, but she had no idea how to respond. But then something in him broke. His anger faded into something softer, more vulnerable, and for the first time, he wasn't just blaming her. "I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to lose everything. And it wasn't just my mom, it's my dad, too. He's not the same anymore, and I thought if I pushed you away, maybe I could get him back. But I can't. I can't fix it." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, as the weight of Ethan's admission settled over them. Sarah felt the truth pierce through her own defenses, and for the first time she saw Ethan not as an enemy but as a scared, lost boy who had been carrying too much on his own. The realization hit her like a wave. All this time, she had been so focused on her own guilt and struggles that she had failed to truly understand him. Before Sarah could respond, Michael appeared in the doorway, his face stricken with understanding. He had been listening. His eyes flickered between them, and for the first time, the tension that had existed in the family seemed to dissolve. "I should have known," Michael murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "I've been so blind, thinking I could fix everything with time. But time doesn't heal wounds when you're not being honest about them." It was in that moment that the full weight of the family's unraveling became clear. The secrets, the manipulation, the avoidance, it was all a result of years of unspoken pain. But now, in the face of the truth, everything was out in the open. They had all been living in their own versions of reality, unable to face the reality of their shared grief. Michael moved toward Ethan, his voice soft and filled with regret. "I'm sorry, son. I never saw how hard this was for you. I should have done better." And as he spoke, Sarah felt the weight of her own role in this family's dysfunction. She had to stop pretending she could be someone she wasn't, and Ethan had to stop trying to hold on to a past that could never be the same. The resolution wasn't easy, and it wasn't a perfect fix. But for the first time, they were speaking honestly, allowing the raw pain to be felt. Ethan, with his walls cracked open, allowed himself to be vulnerable. Sarah and Michael, standing together in the midst of the wreckage, realized that this wasn't about being perfect. It was about being real. And for all the pain they had caused each other, it was the first step toward healing. In the end, the family didn't emerge from the storm unscathed, but they emerged with a deeper understanding of one another. It wasn't about fixing the past, it was about facing the truth and accepting the weight of their mistakes. Together, they could begin to rebuild, not a perfect family, but one that was built on honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to move forward. The room felt stifling, the air thick with unspoken words. Every breath Sarah took seemed heavier than the last, like the oxygen itself had turned oppressive. The heat from the radiator hummed in the corner, but it did nothing to ease the tightness in her chest. Her fingers curled and UNC curled around the edge of the blanket, each motion stiff, like her body was caught between fight and flight. Her heart hammered in her ribcage, each thud so loud it felt as though it would echo through the walls. Across from her, Ethan sat in his usual spot, his back rigid, his jaw set tight. The silence between them was suffocating, thick, almost tangible. She could hear his breath, shallow and quick, in the stillness, the only sound besides the occasional rustle of fabric as he shifted in place. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, unfocused, avoiding hers. But she felt the weight of his gaze, even in the stillness, and it made her stomach twist. Sarah's throat felt dry, tight, like the words she needed to say were lodged somewhere deep inside her, too afraid to break free. She could almost taste the bitterness of the words they'd shared the night before, still lingering in the air, settling on the walls like dust. The scent of the room, a faint mixture of clean laundry and something stale, only made the discomfort worse. She wanted to open the window, let in the fresh air, but even that seemed like too much. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm she tried to project. She could see the way Ethan's shoulders rose and fell with each breath, the way his hands gripped the hem of his shirt as if he were holding on to something just out of reach. His silence was suffocating, more cutting than anything he could have said aloud. She felt the weight of it, the rejection, the anger, the hurt pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe, to think. The minutes dragged on, each one stretching into eternity. Sarah swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears spill. If she let go now, everything would fall apart. And yet, the longer the silence stretched, the more it felt like the inevitable was approaching. Something was going to break, and it wasn't clear if it would be the silence, or her, or him. In that suffocating room, the space between them felt infinite, a chasm neither of them knew how to cross. Everything, every tiny movement, every breath, every glance was filled with a tension that vibrated in the air, leaving them both trembling on the edge of something neither was ready to face. Have you ever been in a situation where family boundaries were pushed, or where you felt like you were forced into a role you didn't sign up for? How did you handle it, and what did you learn about yourself or your family in the process? As we've seen, trust and boundaries within a family are fragile. They're tested in moments of conflict, in spaces where emotions run high and words are sharp. It's easy to forget how much we rely on each other, how much we need to feel seen and understood. But what happens when those boundaries are crossed, or when we can't find the words to express the pain we carry? The distance grows, and the silence between us becomes harder to bridge. This journey reminds us that family isn't just about proximity, it's about respect, honesty, and the courage to face discomfort together. It's okay to struggle, to have those difficult conversations, but it's crucial to do so with compassion and understanding. In our own relationships, let's remember that boundaries are not walls, but a way to protect the emotional space we need to heal and grow. Trust isn't built in a single moment, but in the small acts of vulnerability we offer to one another.